Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Mini Sprouts and our collaboration corner. We are really excited today to talk to our special guest, Elizabeth Hickman. She is a physical therapist by trade, but she is a wonder and a magician when it comes to reflexes. So I have learned from her over multiple courses, and she is just so interesting to work with to see all the connections between skills that our babies and toddlers have and how that connects to retained reflexes. So thank you so much, Elizabeth, for being here.
Thank you. I'm really excited, and it's so exciting just to be in connection with so many other professionals that are seeing some of the same things and just collaborating. So I really appreciate you even inviting me to do this today.
Oh, that's awesome. No, we love working together, and we've seen some amazing things with some of our patients. So I'm just going to start with, tell us about your specialty and maybe, where you started from PT school and how you got into reflexes. And then what's your philosophy of treatment with your patients?
Sure. Okay. So as you said, I'm actually a physical therapist. I graduated back in 2000 from Northwestern, and initially I worked in outpatient orthopedics, but I quickly moved into the school setting, and so I was working in pediatrics and working with kids as young as 3 all the way up to 21. And early on, when as a therapist, the kids that really pulled on my heartstrings were the ones that were being really misunderstood by the system. They were not able to complete the tasks within the classroom environment. They were being deemed behavioral children, and they didn't have usually a diagnosis. And so, in the beginning, I really just didn't understand why these kids were having such challenges. And it wasn't really until I had my first son in 2005 that I blasted into what I'm doing right now. But he was an amazing baby. I had a great pregnancy and so forth, but he started off life fast and furious in the NICU. And so his nervous system was really on high alert from the day he was born. And so I was having such a hard time with sleeping with him. And that is just one behavior of the nervous system was just not in very good balance, and he just could not soothe himself. And I was nursing basically 24 hours of the day to try to help soothe him. So I, both professionally and personally, I was looking for more information. And so what I was seeing in both my son as well as a lot of the kids that I worked with in the schools were that just some of their movement patterns were just very immature and very, I say, primitive. And so kids that were falling out of their chairs or just falling for no reason. It just didn't make sense the way that I learned about it in physical therapy school. So I started researching and looking into primitive reflexes, and that the idea of primitive reflex integration. And I started training with individuals outside of our country, many people from Australia, New Zealand, and then Europe. And that's sort of how my whole journey began. And I very quickly started using a lot of what I was learning with my own son and started bringing that into the educational setting. And at first, I just thought it was coincidental that all of a sudden kids are doing new things, and all of a sudden my son was sleeping through the night. But as time went on, I just kept on seeing pattern after pattern after pattern, and so then I just decided to go ahead and specialize in reflex integration and did a huge deep dive in all of my education. And so then that's the beginning of my story. And now I have my own private practice where I just do reflex integration, and that's what I specialize in. And I think in regards to your question, what's my philosophy of serving clients and all the people that I see here, is really just to meet everybody where they're at. And I am looking at individuals' nervous systems, and I'm helping them to guide them as a facilitator rather than a dictator. So
Yeah, I love your philosophy of treatment and really just kind of letting it be open to what the patient wants and what they need. And even if they don't know what they need, you bring out pictures and you let them show you, and they do know, and they let you know, and they're able to communicate that to you, which is really a beautiful way to treat people.
Yeah, and I think that, I mean, it doesn't matter what age or what communication ability we have. All of us have the ability to communicate at some level, and yet sometimes we miss those things. And so a lot of times, even like I do teach a lot of continuing education classes to professionals, and a lot of it is just helping those professionals to read people's body language, read what their behaviors, a person's behaviors are telling you. And so I think that's the biggest thing, is to kind of key into that, especially when you're working with children. They very easily communicate what their needs are. Sometimes though, as adults, we aren't always listening. So
For sure, for sure. That's amazing. I love that philosophy too, that we innately know what we need. So that's great that you're teaching people to also listen. That's amazing. So as you were saying, you teach people how to read what people need. What are some red flags that a dentist would see in the chair? Like, what are some things that we would be seeing that would be like, okay, they need to see a physical therapist, or even have some reflex integration? Like, what would be some things that would be easily visible to us?
yeah, I have to say that dental appointments for a lot of people can be very overwhelming, not just children, but adults. And the main reason is that there's two reflexes that we consider defensive reflexes that in my language, in my world, are what help to create safety and security. And when you go to the dentist, there are two things that you do at the dentist that is absolutely a trigger for these two reflexes. And so if somebody has immaturity in those two reflexes, you're going to have a very difficult time working with that individual. Number one, there's a reflex called fear paralysis, and the stimulus is touching anything around the face and inside the mouth. What do you have to do as a dentist? You have to touch the face and inside the mouth. So if you have a person or a child, that you're having to work with their teeth, and they are absolutely not wanting you to come near their face at all, the reason mainly is because probably that defensive reflex is getting triggered and they feel very unsafe. Okay, so that's number one. The second reflex is the Moro reflex, and the stimulus often for the Moro reflex is the head going in a backward position. And typically when you clean somebody's teeth or work with them in the dental chair, they're reclined in that position. So again, the two main defensive reflexes can often and will be stimulated if the person has immaturity in those reflexes.
Wow,
That's so true. And
Yes. So that's like, even like when I work with families, sometimes I'm asking them, how did the dentist go this time? Like progress, the fact that all of a sudden a child is willing to allow the dentist or the dental hygienist to clean their teeth is a sign to me that those reflexes are integrating and there's more safety in the system, in the nervous system.
Yeah, and that's just so huge. I mean, I think most people would just, say, oh, that it's just the age of the child, or they're just not cooperating. And, it could be something much that actually needs to be addressed. And it's not just a behavioral issue on the child's part, and they're just not trying to be difficult. So that is very eye-opening.
Yeah, and so, I mean, some of the things that I've even talked to with our own personal dentist, or even others where I live, is that, again, if somebody, a child is having a hard time with you even touching their face or coming near their face, I say modifications or things that, you could do to begin with, which you probably already are doing, is using the visual system to just help them understand what you're doing. So you could even use a parent or a caregiver that's there, and you can show that child what you're going to do, and show and give them a visual cue of what it is looks like that you're doing. Because when fear paralysis is very active, a person typically needs a visual demonstration of what you're doing. Otherwise, they're going to shut down and they're not going to want to do what it is that you're asking them to do. And then for those that don't want to lay back in the chair, and it's because that is very overwhelming, it's stimulating the vestibular system and the person may feel like they're falling, make a modification and clean their teeth in a different position, sideline, or a different position. And I'm sure that those two recommendations you might already be naturally doing, but that it will help so that you're not stimulating those reflexes quite as much.
I know we make those modifications a lot for patients when they come in for cleanings. And I think people, especially hygienists or people that are doing the cleanings, they don't understand maybe why, those patients don't want to lay back, why that's such an issue. It's just an hindrance for, them trying to do what they need to do, but, understanding that there's a really innate reason why this patient is feeling that way brings a lot more explanation to things.
Right. And I think that the more that you can create that safe environment and even have that communication with whomever you're working with to help, understand what it is that their needs are. The other thing is that there's a lot of bright lights, and things that are, in the eyes. And so sometimes even, a child or an adult needs their eyes covered because that can also stimulate, it can be a stimulus for the defensive reflexes as well. So, and that's even in my office here, I allow each person to create their own sensory experience. They get to put the lights how they want them. Do they want it completely dark in here? Do they want the lights bright? What do they want? Do they want the music playing? So they are in charge of their experience, because as soon as we have control over that, we feel safer. And so again, when you're going through any kind of dental work or just even a simple cleaning, getting somebody into a very safe, position, then you're going to have much better outcomes in what you're doing.
Fascinating. I love it. It's so interesting. If we could just talk a little bit about reflexes that we might be seeing in infants, because we are going to be, seeing infants with this program. So, about the gag and the root suck, and aren't having those reflexes come about when they're at an age where that should still be happening. Can you talk to that a little bit?
Yeah, for sure. Root suck is a huge one. And so, and what's interesting about the reflex that I spoke with before, fear paralysis, which the stimulus is along the face, root suck has the exact same stimulus. So when you're working with an infant, if you even were to just check and just have, brush their cheek, see which direction that their head turns to. If root suck has emerged, then the head should actually go towards where the stimulus is. If in fact you stimulate the cheek and the head goes the opposite direction, that fear paralysis is still very active. And I will tell you that in that situation, getting a suitable professional that knows about reflex integration will be helpful to you.
Yeah, it was amazing to me in your courses learning about when a patient who's even an older patient that still has fear paralysis that has not been integrated, all the things, how everything just builds on itself and everything dominoes back to that one reflex that is still being retained. So could you talk a little bit about how that works, how in your work you have to go back to really to find where you need to start?
Yeah. And so, in general, the two reflexes, moro and fear paralysis, are the gate to everything. Okay. So because we have to create safety and security in our system before we can actually move out and explore the world. So that is primary. And so when we have those two refluxes, if there's still immaturity in those two refluxes, there's going to be many other refluxes that are also going to hold immaturities as well. Now, again, in the use of the modality that I use, which is rhythmic movement training, there isn't a sequence to necessarily how you go about addressing reflexes. We follow what the person wants to do first, because the reality is that a baby never wakes up one day and says, oh, I'm going to go ahead and start integrating my root suck reflex. You know, the baby integrates the reflex as they are motivated to move on to putting things into their mouth, moving on to solid foods and so forth. And so even though there is this like sequence within the reflex patterns, they overlap each other. So, but it really all goes back often to the defensive reflexes. And so eventually you do need to get there, but you may not start there too.
Yeah. So you mentioned solid food. So if we have patients that are struggling to have that transition to solid foods, and maybe we're not having a structural issue, it could be a reflexive issue.
Mm-hmm. It could be a reflexive issue. It could be that child is wanting to hold on to root suck because one of the strongest ways within root suck is not only for nutritional purposes, but it also, the purpose of root suck can also be to modulate the nervous system. And so you know, within our nervous system, we have the autonomic nervous system, which you have the parasympathetic system and you have the sympathetic system. The sympathetic system is that fight or flight system, and the parasympathetic is rest, relax, and digest. And so one of the purposes of root suck early on is not only for nutrition, but it's also to bring in the parasympathetic nervous system. So that's why also babies, they use pacifiers, they suck their fingers, they suck their thumbs, you know, they suck on things, they put things in their mouth because they're self-soothing with that. It's not always for nutritional purposes. So when you have a child that's having a hard time or not wanting to move on to solids, there could be multiple reasons why. It could be that they just want to keep on you know, using root suck, or it could be too that, you know, fear paralysis is still very strong and they haven't developed all of the musculature in their mouth to allow for you to move on to lateralization of the tongue to be learning, you know, all the patterns, front to back, elevation, all of those things that underpin chewing and swallowing and things.
And that also might speak to our patients who really have extended periods of time with thumb sucking, finger sucking, any kind of sucking habit, because back to something going on with their reflexes.
Right. And I will tell you that, I mean, with you know, I early on when I started in reflex integration, I was working with a child and they did not actually, the family did not speak any English. They only spoke Spanish. So I didn't have the full picture because I was working through a translator in the school environment. And this child was 4 years of age and would only take nutrition through a bottle and also was not speaking at all. And, you know, we started doing some reflex integration work, and all of a sudden this child started to even consider snack time, started bringing her snack home, the apples at home, and started eating the apples at home. She started to actually talk a little bit. And then I found out that actually when she was 2, she was eating foods. She was actually talking and making sounds. But what happened is that she went to the dentist for the first time, and the dentist took away her pacifier, cold turkey, which is basically her safety and security without addressing the refluxes. And as soon as they took away that passy, the child completely shut down and stopped eating and talking.
Oh,
So
wow.
again, like part of it is understanding that, of course, from a dental perspective, I get that you do not want to be having a child suck on their fingers, having the pacifier, having like a bottle for too long of a period of time. We want to develop that palate. We want to make sure that the teeth come in properly, but we also need to understand, why is that child holding on to the pacifier? Why are they holding on to thumb sucking? And it's for a soothing purpose. And so again, that may be reason for you to get a suitable professional to help that child through more reflex integration or developing more safety in their system, rather than having to use a pacifier or their fingers for soothing.
Yeah, that's so fascinating, like really getting down to the root cause of why these things are happening. That's one thing that we, both of us, are just so passionate about and really wanting to answer those questions. I did want to ask you one other question about birth history. I think birth history, like learning about birth histories, is really integral to knowing how the baby was born and any kind of traumas that happened during, to help understand their reflex journey. Could you speak to that a little bit?
Sure. I mean, there's so many things like, and even when, because I have a lot of mothers that come to my classes, and the reality is that we can look back and shame ourselves about like, oh, I should have done it this way, or I wish things would have gone that way, and so forth. But each of us have our own history and our own journey. I can even say personally, I was born via C-section. My mom at that time had no choice but to deliver me via C-section, because my brother was a C-section baby. And at that time in, the 70s, they didn't do VBACs, right? And so there was no choice. And yet the reality is that birth history gives us opportunity to understand where there may have been holes in the laying down of that neurological foundation. It's not necessarily causal, it's just that the system didn't go through the birth canal per se, or the baby was born really early and some of these reflexive patterns had not really even fully emerged yet. So sometimes it just gives us information. But the beauty of the nervous system and the brain is that it's infinitely placid. So even though you may have a significant birth history with a person that you're working with, if you go back and you allow for the system to have opportunity to go through some of those patterns, the brain will change and those connections will change. And so that truly is the hope within my practice, is that I know that the brain has infinite ability to change and grow and adapt. It's amazing what our brains can do.
Well, that's amazing. I have learned so much. And I think it's, it just speaks volumes as to, there are so many things that we can do, and we need to constantly be learning and evaluating our patients to know when to send them to the right people. And like you said, there's someone that we need to send them to if our reflexes aren't, working properly. And you mentioned finding that professional. So I do want to talk about that. How would we go about finding a professional such as yourself? Because I think it, could be kind of tricky trying to find someone, because it seems like you're very specialized and I love it. But how can, we have people that are in rural areas, we have people that are, all over the country. So how is there like a website they can go to, or what would they be looking for?
Yeah, I will tell you, back in 2008, when I started this practice, I definitely was on an island. And so one of my missions, even within my practice, is providing a lot of continuing education courses. And so as I mentioned, the modality that I use for reflex integration is called rhythmic movement training. And you can go to the Rhythmic Movement Training International website and you can select the state that you live in, and they do on the website have certified consultants that have actually gone through the programming and have decided that reflex integration is going to be something that they specialize in. So that's one option. Now, again, the modality that I use is not the only reflex integration program out there. There are so many wonderful reflex integration programs out there. So I think that sometimes just searching out and using those buzzwords of reflex integration, it would be, you know, your best option. And then when you do have an opportunity and then you find somebody, interview them on the phone. I mean, there is not a single person that comes to my office that I don't have typically anywhere from a 15-minute to an hour conversation with the families or the individual before they even start services here, so that then you can ask like what it is that their philosophies are, and you know what if reflex integration, like how they go about, what modalities they use and things like that.
Great.
Yeah.
All right.
That's a great start. And I know you said that you have moms sometimes come to your classes too. So that's always another opportunity and resource. You know, if you have a kiddo that's struggling and needs some help, that would be an opportunity too.
Yep. And that's the thing is that, again, like with my teaching, you know, and here I can only service so many clients individually, but the more I can help other professionals understand this, the more people that are going to benefit. And realizing that, yes, I'm a physical therapist, but reflex integration hits every single developmental domain. So you don't have to be a PT to be doing reflex integration. You know, you all in your practice doing body work and doing mouth work, doing all those things absolutely is within your practice. And I encourage it. And I think sometimes, you know, as healthcare providers, often we kind of stay in our lane, but the reality is that everything overlaps each other. And so, just because you're not finding maybe a reflex integration specialist that's a PT, there's OT, speech and language pathologists, lactation consultants, chiropractors, nurses. I mean, I have so many different people that have come to classes. And also, like, I love when parents come. It's wonderful to have parents come. And so, you know, that's the beauty of all of this too, so.
All right, well, great. We appreciate you taking the time and giving us all this wonderful information. Is there any last parting words for the doctors that are going to be watching this? Any words of wisdom for finding someone or anything that we haven't covered?
I don't think so. I just really appreciate the opportunity. And I think, again, we really take it for granted that we know a lot more than we give ourselves credit for. And if you go with your gut, you're never going to go wrong. And you also, if we can just put on our facilitator hats rather than our dictator hats more when we're practicing, I think then we usually end up having better results.
Love that advice. Love that advice. Your model is so different from anything I've ever experienced. And I've really, really loved learning from you. So, you know, again, that's also an opportunity for you to come learn with Elizabeth how she runs her practice. So thank you again so much for talking to us and for your time.
Thank you, ladies.